Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of FireDEV, a fireside chat with people in the industry. Today, my guest is Ranulph Tees. Ranulph, thank you for coming on to the episode today. How are you?
I'm fantastic. It's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So, your name, Ranulph Tees, am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. But you can call me Ran.
Ran. Yeah, I think I will.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, I'm concentrating now on your first name, but I feel like in about 30 minutes, I'll probably just end up butchering it because I'm thinking about, something, that we're talking about. So, yeah, I'll call you Ran. Like, where is that name from? Because it doesn't, like, I don't recognize the name. So you're the first person I've come across with that name.
It's a rare name. I actually looked it up when I was a kid, and it's a Viking name, which is weird because I'm not at all Viking. I'm Scottish Irish. But my parents they met an explorer, a guy called Ranulph Fiennes, when I was before I was born. They were really impressed by him. He was the first guy to kind of walk single-handedly across Antarctica. He's climbed all the mountains. He's been across. I think he's done a marathon on every continent in
Ooh.
7 days. And they really liked him, so they chose that name. The alternative, it could have been Gandalf. So
Was there a serious contender, Gandalf?
it was, yeah, because they shorten it to Alfie, and kind of Ranulph Alf is like at the end of it, and so Gandalf was an option, Alfred was an option, but yeah, it went for Ranulph, and I've had that ever since.
Okay. I mean, so you're saying it's a Viking name. Is it like a popular name over like in Iceland, or is it not a popular name even for
Oh,
Vikings?
I mean, like this is like old school Viking, like kind of
Yeah.
like 1,000 years ago. I think there were like Norman conquerors who were called it, but very
Okay.
few other Ranulphs. I've only ever met one other in my life actually.
Okay. And was he Icelandish or not?
Nope, he was also English like me. He also didn't know why he was called it, and just kind of his parents liked the name and chose it.
You never know. His parents may have met the same guy.
Probably, yeah. You know what? They probably did, yeah.
Yeah, possibly. So yeah, Ran, you're working at SurveyMind right now. You co-founded that company. Do you want to talk a little bit about what SurveyMind is and how you fits in with the current state of AI?
Absolutely, yeah. So SurveyMind, in a nutshell, it's a transcription and an analysis engine, and we're really focusing on market researchers. So people who are doing focus groups, people who are doing interviews. They go out, they talk to their customers, and they've just got hours after hours of audio and video, and it's great quality data. But one of their big problems is they have to transcribe that, getting into a text format, and that's either very expensive or very long and very boring. And so the state of the art in transcription wasn't very good for a long time. AI's come along, and there's lots of great models, and we've pieced together a selection of models which are really, really good for multiple people speaking at once. It will take an audio file, it will take a video file, and it will transcribe it and identify the speakers inside it as well. So you'll actually get a transcript out which looks like something you could use in a research project. And that's our main thing that we're offering. And then on top of that, we've built we've built analytics engines. So using the latest kind of LLMs to really analyze the data which is inside those transcripts. And the big thing that we're really working on going forward is solving the long-term memory problem, which a lot of AI startups are having, which is that over time, LLMs, they lose the context that they had 48,000 tokens or 96,000 tokens or however long it might be ago. And so if you're trying to analyze 10 transcripts at the moment, it's very hard to do that on a tool like ChatGPT or anything like that. You just couldn't do it. Also, for data security reasons, you couldn't do it. But we're working on algorithms which essentially condense the information as much as possible, minimizing information loss so that you can actually deal with a huge amount of transcripts at once. And that's going to be very, very powerful for the industry. We're seeing actually a couple of medical research use cases for this, where you can kind of have 20 different patients who've all been on a trial, all giving their experience, each of them talking for upwards of an hour to an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then analyze 20 hours worth of text data at once. And that's very, very powerful. And we're releasing that feature early next year. Very exciting place to work.
Okay. Like, how accurate, is this transcribing and, summarizing? Because, like you said, over the years, there's been several tools, trying to do this, whether it's, audio to text to audio, or just text to text. And, like I said, the applications available have been lackluster at best. Because I remember over the years I've looked at summarizers for just text articles, because what you'll find, and I'm sure you've come across this, there'll be a text article that might be the equivalent of two A4 pages if you put it onto in Word, but literally it's only 20 actual, it's only two sentences of actual information that you need. The rest is filler just to pad it out for the blog, for example. And I've looked at summarizers, to be able to get the information that that is actually unique to that article and isn't filler. And again, I haven't found it to be that good. So how accurate is SurveyMind's application?
I mean, that's a great question. If we look at just the summarization, one of the big problems that a lot of people have when they use a tool like ChatGPT is it gives those very verbose, very long, flowery answers, which they don't get to the crux of what you want. Sometimes you literally just want a bullet point summary, or sometimes you just literally want that 2 line answer the question for me. And a lot of the things there is if it's well, sorry, let me restart there. You've got two different issues there. One is you've got the kind of system level instruction that you want to give the LLM, make sure that it gives output in the right way, and that's a relatively easy problem to solve. And then you've got the fine tuning problem, which is, let's say you're in a domain specific. Like I say, we were talking about medical research earlier. There's a lot of acronyms in medical research. You want to make sure that it understands the context of that. And that's a fine tuning specialist model issue. And what I think, both in SurveyMind, where we're building stuff which is designed for summarization of either market research data or medical data or think tank data or polling data, that it both has the right system level engineering and also can be fine tuned. And something that we'd love to do, and I think a lot of other companies will end up doing as we move forwards in the AI space, is give companies the option to fine tune their own models. You have like a big base model and then let a company which has their own data fine tune it so that they can then use it to query their own data sets, understand the context of their customers and what problems they're facing, understand what kind of questions their employees are likely to ask so that you can preempt it with the right level system engineering. But yeah, it's definitely, these are all exactly the kind of subtle issues that you really want to solve when providing a product like this.
So what LLM are you using behind the scenes? Are you using ChatGPT or something else or something custom?
So I can't unfortunately give too much information about exactly what we're doing under the hood because it's proprietary and it's kind of kept under a few NDAs. What I can kind of give is the high level overview, which is we use a lot of different models,
Okay.
some proprietary, some open source, some API based. And what I can also say is that one thing that I think in the business sense, a lot of companies that talk to us who are they're trying to migrate their workflows towards AI, and they've just come out of 10 years of trying to migrate it towards the cloud. They're all no one's data security departments, no one's chief data protection officers really understand the questions to be asking. It's a real, everyone uses the phrase, it's a grey area for us right now. And a lot of that comes down to the data security question. So me and my co-founder, Alex, what we're really trying to bake into our AI product offering is essentially data security from the very start. You don't want to just plug in data to anyone willy-nilly. You want to make sure that the company that's giving you a service is going to be absolutely watertight with their data controls, with their data security, not going to unfairly train models without your consent, not going to store your data for a long period of time without necessity. So we're making sure we're building all this in from day one, day zero even. It was our kind of our original thesis is to provide that service. And I think the successful companies with the one that will be able to really persuade people and persuade people for the right reasons that they're the ones to be trusted with their AI provision because they're not going to mess around with the data they get put into the system.
Yeah, that's a concern that I've heard from many people that are running companies, that they don't know what that data is being used for, that they might pump into a LLM like ChatGPT, especially a code file, for example, and if that has some sort of proprietary algorithms, they don't know what access somebody has to it, how that can be used to inform the model. So that, I know that's one concern people have. So obviously it'll be interesting to see how it pans out for everyone, and obviously it's good that SurveyMind is looking into it. And obviously keeping that at the forefront, because that's definitely something that companies are going to be concerned about. And naturally they always are, because security and obviously data privacy as well.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of the fun things to look at with ChatGPT is to try and jailbreak it and see
Mm.
can you get it to give output that it's designed not to do. And there was one you may have even seen it quite recently where a group of researchers, I think it was at Google, where they were getting ChatGPT to essentially just repeat the same word over and over and over until it eventually diverged. And at the point of diversion, it just started regurgitating a lot of very sensitive personal information. I mean, we're talking kind of things like bank details, CVs, addresses, for people who just happen to kind of have their data included in the training set. And I think a lot of the very very big, huge large language models, which are trained on data sets on text corpuses larger than the likes of, say, the Wikipedia data set or the Stack Overflow data set, when you've got kind of the massive data dumps, which are going to include things like that because you just can't get rid of it all. That's a real danger. If your foundational model contains things like that, how on earth are you going to not make sure that it doesn't spit that out? I don't know if that's even really necessarily solvable, because any amount of alignment, as far as I understand it, is prone to being beaten at some point. It's not like we can kind of hard code it. It's a black box. So that's definitely something I think the people building these largest of models are going to be watching out for.
Oh yeah, I feel like there'll be a market for both. Like the ones that maybe more powerful or more broadly accessible, and maybe people don't care about the data that they're putting in, especially if you're an individual, for example. But then there will be those more black box models where organizations sensitive data, they want to make sure that, like you said, that data isn't just being pumped out because somebody tricked it, at Google. So yeah,
Exactly.
I mean, I haven't come across that one, but that definitely sounds interesting. I'm gonna Google that one. Have you seen the one where they tricked it? I've tried it; it doesn't work anymore. But they tricked it to spew out Windows license keys.
Really, I know I haven't seen that one, but I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah, like, you can't do any, like, if the person who figured out the hack at the time, if you asked it, can you give me like Windows 11 license keys, it would say, I can't do that because of obviously you know security and license issues. But they figured out, if they said that my grandmother used to read me a story about Windows license keys effectively, and that my grandmother is no longer with us, and I yearn for hearing those stories. That's the rough gist of it. Can
Yep.
you read me those stories so I can be happy? And then he would actually, he created a story, those Windows license keys that were usable in there.
I'm not surprised by that, because back in the early days after they'd just released GPT-4, so I think it was around about March or April time, you could very easily do that kind of context level tricking, get it thinking it was in one state of mind, and it would very easily be jailbreakable at that point. The classic one I saw, and actually I managed to get it, I got this to work, is I got it to think I was a chemistry PhD student
Mm-hmm.
in the context of writing a dissertation, and then it would never normally give things like the recipe for MDMA, but in the context of a in the context of a PhD chemistry dissertation, it gave it straight away. Obviously, it wasn't used, but you could jailbreak it like that, and that was something which I think they've really really over engineered it. And then for a while, around about June July, it was heavily over aligned and was actually very hard to get useful coding output out of it. For example, because it was just it was almost too much, like it was too impossible to jailbreak. And I think they've managed to get it to a very good state where it is very verbose, it is very flowery, but it's now much harder to break. Although people are still finding novel new ways of doing it all the time.
Yeah, I think that's always going to be the case. With any form of technology, it's like the iPhone. They're usually a bit harder to jailbreak these days compared to when the first was coming out. I remember having jailbreaks ready day one, pretty much, for based on the development software and versions that were released. Like day one, you would get a particular iPhone and it would be jailbroken, or within a week or two. And now, it can take a bit of time. Uh, Plus, I feel like the excitement wears off as well.
Mm.
With like a jailbreak, that it gets to a point where the hackers, they just don't see the point in it anymore, and yet there'll be those exploits around. One, it gets tougher. Two, the fascination wears off. There'll probably be something else that'll be jailbreaking, especially if it's a low hanging fruit that they can easily get some excitement and buzz around it, and then you'll kind of just become a solid enough product with a solid enough ecosystem that they just won't care about jailbreaking it. And so the software SurveyMind, how long are we talking in terms of like translating, and summarizing? So if you have an hour long video, for example, and you want to summarize and put that into text format, quick summary, how long does that processing take?
Yep. So we're aiming for 10x real time. So for an hour long video, we'd aim to get it done in 6 minutes. That's on a really good day that it can manage that. It's usually around about 6x to 10x. So could be anywhere between 12 minutes and 6 minutes, but it's still way faster than having it done by hand by humans.
No, yeah, I mean, by hand. Plus, the beauty of it is, if you, if like the context isn't right, or you want to slightly change the way it's analyzed, it's a lot easier to do that. Versus if you are doing it manually, you probably don't want to go over it again. Whereas getting an AI to do it, even if it's just running in the background, it's not that big of a deal. You could, have it running overnight or over lunchtime, for example.
Absolutely, and actually, sorry, I should have been clearer there. Sorry, it's the transcription process which spits out the transcript. That's the bit that's done at like 10x speed. The summarization and the analysis, that's actually much faster. So if you've got, say, about a 1 hour transcript, you're looking at around about 10,000 words. Maybe it could be anywhere between kind of 5,000, 15,000 words. That could actually be done in a couple of minutes for the actual summary once you've got that text. So there's the two different processes there.
Okay. And SurveyMind, what motivated you to found this company, and what were you doing previous to that?
Yeah, good question. So, SurveyMind, it's a company that my good friend Alex and I, Alex Sunley, we co-founded together in early 2022. We had a couple of ideas in AI and big data around the end of 2021. My background is essentially I started working in financial services out of university, didn't enjoy it very much at all. So I moved into education. I did a 2-year research master's at Oxford, where I studied in the applications of AI to maths assessment. So teaching 8 to 11-year-olds how to learn maths for a computer. What are the right ways for them to do that to get maximum benefit from each, essentially, minute of screen time? So how to give them feedback, how can a computer give accurate feedback, how much needs to be pre-programmed by humans versus how much can be generated by a language model, how much context of maths do you need, how much context of the child's kind of previous academic ability do you need, etc. How to make multiple choice tests that lose no information. And that was what I kind of spent 5 years doing. Built a tutoring agency which is based around that research, specifically on the ways that we can make sure kids take a test, understand what they don't know, understand what they do know, understand what they don't know, and make sure we tailor the tutoring exactly towards what they don't understand. And by kind of mid 2021, we'd had COVID. My company had grown quite large. We had about 40 tutors at that point in time, maybe even nearly 50 at one point. But tutoring is not something which there's no massive tutoring agencies for the reason which is that it grows very linearly. It's very hard to scale. There's a lot of cool ed tech, but actually, by the end of 2021, I'd seen a little bit of what was to come with. At the time, I thought it was actually more to do with big data than AI. the kind of the interplay between the two. And so my friend Alex, who'd been in the civil service, was a senior qual researcher there, um, doing a lot of work for various departments, a lot of big stuff. He and I got together in early 2022. We founded SurveyMind, and actually, what we initially planned on doing, this is why survey is in the name, is building AI-powered surveys. So how to kind of auto-generate questions based on a prompt. We had an early algorithm which worked with an old version of GPT-3 before ChatGPT even came out, which could kind of take a prompt and turn it into questions and then spit that out to people straight away via email. And that was a cool product, but it was a good business lesson, actually, which is just because you can build a cool product doesn't mean you can build a product that people are going to pay for. And we've really struggled to get paying users for the survey product. Whereas alongside that, we've been working on this transcription engine, we've been working on the long format qual data analysis engine, and we started working with UCLA, the university out in Los Angeles, and they were loving what we were doing. They were using us for a lot of projects. We had a couple of market researchers based out elsewhere in the States, a couple in Canada, a couple in Ireland, and really that was the thing which we realized customers are giving us the important information here. This is what they're paying for. They want transcription. They want long format analysis. They don't want a survey engine. We're a small startup. We've got to prioritize. So we're stuck with survey in the name, but actually we have nothing to do with surveys anymore. So that's kind of the long and the short of it, really.
Have you thought about rebranding?
It's an ongoing discussion, and the trouble is we've now got a domain which has got several customers going there, logging into it. We've got in kind of the emails. We've got all our people sending us emails at the SurveyMind.io kind of domain name. So there's a little bit now of inertia. We're kind of stuck with it. We really like the logo, so we are probably going to change the name at some point. But we're waiting to work out exactly what that's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one way is to keep the existing domain name, the existing email, but just have it, all forwarded. So I don't know if you call it, AI Mind, for example. If you go to surveymind.com, it just forwards you to AImind.com, and obviously if you put Ranulph at surveymind dot com, if I send an email to that, you just go to Ranulph at AImind .com.
That would be the way. Yeah, we want to make sure that having changed our name, we actually had an even different name before we all did the survey, so it would be our third change of name.
Yeah.
We want to just make sure we get the right one.
Yeah, I mean, probably a slightly more generic one where even if your business model changes, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, that's one thing I've really learned is that generic names have such good power, which is you get that flexibility. We thought SurveyMind was great because it would be a bit of free advertising, free marketing. Everyone will think of surveys when they see it. But yeah, that really kind of pigeonholes you into you've got to be doing what it says on the tin. Get a more
Because
generic name, you're more
otherwise,
flexible.
if you see a brand name, I've seen it before, and I just expect it to do, to be related to something, and then I see what it actually is, and I'm like without an explanation, the name doesn't help. Like it actually hinders, because I'll see and think, okay, I'm not in the market for, I don't know, to take survey, I'm not in the market for a survey product, something to do with surveys, but I might be in the market for summarizing an hour-long video to text.
Exactly, yeah. And that would be kind of where, if we can get a cool name which is generic enough but also gives that kind of like I say, Mind's got, I mean, DeepMind, for example, is a big kind of name in AI. We want something which kind of has a bit of cachet, is cool, but yeah, doesn't pigeonhole us at all.
Yes, of course. So, previous to all of that, your experience, you worked at JP Morgan, Close Brothers Asset Management, and The Economist, those sort of three are, a bit more corporate, a bit different to, I guess, AI tech, per se. So, do you want to talk about a bit about that background and, why you got into that, and then, why that shift away from the more corporate setting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a lot of those were kind of whilst I was still at university doing internships, and then after university, I went into JP Morgan. So it was very early in my career. And what I would say is that I think I'm really glad I did it. I learned a lot from a lot of very good mentors. It gave me a strong understanding of what corporate life would be like. And it also made me really realize why it wasn't the right life for me at all. It's very much you go in, you're doing a job, you've got very narrow parameters. There's a hierarchy. It's very political. Um, uh, it's not very creative. And what I really like doing is I like problem solving. I like doing a lot of different things. It's one of the things that kind of draws me into kind of coding and software architecture and AI. It's why I've always loved building things. Um, you have an enormous amount of creativity to do exactly what you want. I mean, you're within a lot of confines as well. I mean, building a startup, your confines are essentially build what the customer wants. But that's a single goal that you're working towards, and there's multiple routes towards it. Whereas when you're in equity research, you've got to build a model exactly the way your senior associate or your MD says you build the model. You build the report exactly the way that the company style has. You don't deviate from company line on inflation or anything like that. And so I really learned a lot. It was a great way to start a career, but I very quickly realized that I much preferred startups, entrepreneurial life, flexibility, creativity, and having that one goal of building something that's going to make customers come back rather than working in narrow parameters.
Okay. And whilst you was at uni, did you do any, entrepreneurial endeavors, any sort of, side hustles or side gigs, that helped you discover that?
I did. A very very dear friend of mine, Dominic. He and I we lived together at the time, and we ended up doing quite a strange business where we sold incontinence pads over Amazon via drop shipping. So we'd buy in. I think at one point we bought 10,000 incontinence pads via Alibaba. Had them shipped all the way from China into the UK. We didn't actually get them to go to a warehouse because we were testing them at the start. So our entire dorm room, both his and mine, and most of the living room, was absolutely full to the brim with incontinence pads. And then we just had to try and ship them, sell them. Our parents' friends, our friends' parents, anyone at the university who listened. We would even kind of say you don't have to. You can buy the incontinence pad. We'll put Kit Kats in there so that you get the Kit Kats in the mail rather than just getting the incontinence pads. And it really, I mean, we learned a lot doing that. We lost quite a bit of money. Realized two 19-year-olds in a dorm room. We were not Mark Zuckerberg. We were just messing around, really. But it was great fun, really good fun. We had a great mentor who was teaching us a lot about how to advertise online, how to listen to customer feedback. I mean, that's the one thing which I've learned from out for all this. For example, we were selling incontinence pads, thinking we'd be selling to people who needed them, but actually we ended up being bought mostly by people who had pets who were using them for pet training, for house training, their cats and dogs. So it just tells you that that's a good UX UI. You can anticipate what your users are going to do, but actually it's what your users do end up doing, which is what matters the most. But that was my kind of my first kind of experience of entrepreneurialism, and luckily we didn't lose too much money and we had a lot of fun doing it.
Okay. What made you, do that? Like, especially a business, around incontinence, pads as well. Because obviously, if it's something like, I don't know, if you're doing a computer science degree and you're doing mobile development and you like, social media and you think, what, I'll try a bit of like a social media app, for example, like some sort of forum or blog, that's kind of in line. So, like, why business, doing your own business, and then why that particular business of pads?
So it's I've always had kind of like a soft spot for kind of get rich quick schemes. I've always been kind of like a bit of an economist like that. I love the idea of not necessarily easy money, but I like the idea of buying something and selling it for profit. Always have ever since I was a kid. And it was a friend of my dad's who was running a very, very successful at the time dropshipping operation, and he was our mentor throughout this. And he was giving us all this advice on how do you pick a product? Do you do it from the demand side? Look what people are buying. Do you do it from the supply side? Look what's easy to get shipped, etc. And he said you really want to find that sweet spot, which is something where there's no market leader, but there is demand for it, that it's easy to ship, easy to store. And the great thing about an incontinence pad is it's durable, so it's not going to go off.
Yeah.
It's resilient. It doesn't tear easily. It doesn't break easily. It's two-dimensional, which is massive in kind of physical products. Like, you got to really think about the physical product. If it's two-dimensional, you can stack it. So that massively cuts down, like 1,000 incontinence pads. I think we could store it in about 1.2 square meters or something. So that was fantastic. And I got into it because I saw my dad's friend was doing. I liked it. He was very, very kind and said, "Look, I'll mentor you in this if you guys do if you guys do the social media for me." And so we did the social media for him, kind of doing Facebook posts, Instagram posts, YouTube comments, YouTube videos, and that was good learning as well, to kind of generate a buzz around his product. But yeah, it was just at the time I thought when I was a kid, I could do a little bit of basic HTML and CSS, and I wasn't bad with a computer. But I didn't really learn to code until around about 2017, 2018. I got into AWS for a couple of contracting jobs, learned the AWS platform. Then I learned Python. Actually, no, on my research degree, I had to learn R and MATLAB, which were not great languages. And then I learned Java, which I didn't really enjoy until I kind of found Python. Absolutely loved it. Found the Django web framework. Absolutely loved that. And that's kind of been my journey into coding. At the time when I was 20, I was not good enough to code to build a kind of a social media app or anything like that.
Okay. And at university, you got a Bachelor of Arts in philosophy and economics. Obviously, that kind of lines up with your time as an economist. Close Brothers Asset Management, J.P. Morgan. But then obviously that's a bit different to Cavendish Milton, now SurveyMind. So what made you go and do philosophy and economics? And what was the key moments where you felt like this probably isn't the way I want to pursue my future?
So philosophy and economics, I've always loved philosophy ever since I can. Well, I mean, I suppose I didn't really know what it was when I was under the age of 10, but since I really knew what it was, I've loved reading about problems. I think I was about 11 or 12 when I came across Bertrand Russell's Problems of Philosophy History of Western Philosophy. And that was a book which I really, really enjoyed. I got really into it as a teenager. Loved a lot of different philosophers, from Marx and Nietzsche through to Sartre. Kierkegaard is I'm a huge fan of his. And at university, I've always loved philosophy, so I specialised in that. Economics, it's one which it's very closely related to philosophy, in the sense that you're really trying to take a very abstract problem and break it down into its component parts. Economics is a bit more hands-on, a bit more genuine real-world modelling than philosophy, which can be arguing about completely abstract things. But yeah, I wanted to do a mixture of those two subjects. They were what I did for A level. I did a bit of maths and physics and stuff as well, but they were the two which really kind of appealed to me. And as an 18-year-old, you don't really know what you want to do. I kind of had a rough idea that maybe I'd do journalism, maybe I'd do finance, maybe I'd do something completely different, maybe stay in academia. But they were just the ones that I got kind of drawn into. And that was the thing where kind of doing a joint honours degree, you get sat with two different groups of students. I had the philosophy students on the one hand with crazy hair and very relaxed attitudes, and then the economics cohort on the other hand, which is this bunch of 18-year-olds who come into their lectures wearing a suit, tie, and briefcase, and they're all applying for these things called spring weeks, which I'd never even heard of, didn't even have a clue that you did apply for a job at 18 or 19. And they kind of were all going for consultancy or banking. So if it weren't for the exposure to them on my course, I wouldn't have even tried to get into things like Close Brothers or JP Morgan. But luckily for exposure to them, I did. Got a lot of help along the way. And yeah, that's kind of how I fell into that. I think that's a lot of what university is, really. It's you don't really know what you're going to get yourself into until you get there, and then you fall into a lot of random things you didn't really expect. But it worked out well.
Okay. I mean, Not during university. Actually, not my course, I should say, but like at the end of university and post university, I really did get into philosophy and economics as well. I started looking at a lot of scientists, a lot of philosophers, a lot of the ones that you're mentioning, Nietzsche, Karl Marx, and Engels as well,
Mm.
a lot of that side of it, and alternative ways of running an economy, running so the financial system. I did really essentially start going down a huge rabbit hole, and it's still something that I'm actively doing. I feel like once you go down that rabbit hole, like Morpheus says in
Yeah.
Matrix, like once you start looking, you, it kind of it's difficult not to look at it. It's difficult to look back because you start seeing so many different things from a different perspective. You start realizing, oh, that's why that is the way it is in the world, and I can't go back to having the blinders on anymore. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
I started going crazy into looking at different things. And, once you start looking at all these different people, and all the time I'm coming across someone new, so some new economist, some new philosopher, some new mathematician, and I'm like, it just, what I want to say, elevates the game, but you look at it and think, how does everyone not know about this? Uh,
Mm.
but yeah, it's those are sort of discussions that I love having. Talking about Nietzsche or Engels or Marx or any of these philosophers and mathematicians and scientists, really, and then their ways of doing things, and how could that potentially be implemented in today's economy, and what would be the ramifications of implementing it, on a large scale, and where did previous you know philosophies fail, for example, and were they truly failures, etc. So yeah, it is one of those things. If you start looking into it, it can be very fun, but also very, you know, I want to say time consuming, but
Oh, very time consuming.
yeah, but
Yeah.
just time consuming as well. But it can just be like it just draws you in, and like everything, you almost get that feeling whenever anybody says anything. It can be about anything. It's be like, it's not that they're wrong, but it's just so surface level what they're saying compared to everything underneath.
Oh, completely. And I mean, time consuming is a great way of putting it. I think philosophy is the place to go if you have a lot of questions, but don't expect any answers because you're just going to keep finding rabbit hole after rabbit hole. For every amazing argument a philosopher can give, there's going to be 10 philosophers who give an equally convincing counter argument. I'm not relativist or anything at all. I don't. I think it's important to take a position, but you will lose the courage of a kind of a sincerely held faith position quite fast when you realize just how easy it is to dissect so many arguments. Um,
Oh, oh yeah, and when you realize that you can't win every argument, even with logic and facts, because not everyone will listen to logic and facts and evidence that is put in front of them. There will be people, and not just a few, probably the vast majority of the world, that they'll say 2 + 2 = 5 because that's what they've been told.
oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
and that's one of the things that I've come to realize over the years, because I've come across it in all walks of life when people get too sort of serious and bogged down with some belief. Again, it doesn't have to be philosophical or economical. It could just be about movies, for example. Something relatively insignificant, but they get just so religious about an idea and a belief that it just hinders their life. And like, at the end of the day, it's like, does it even matter that much? And then obviously once you get to the philosophical side of things, yeah, you can argue all day long with people, you can try and persuade them, but if you're just constantly being that guy that's just fully absorbed in it, then all focusing is on theory, not really applying anything, and you're just not doing anything yourself. Like, that's one thing you've got to be very careful of when studying philosophy and I'll say economics is there's more to life and the world than what you'll see in these philosophers, what you'll read in books. Because at the end of the day, the world moves on. Even if
Mm.
you're right, it doesn't mean that the world will not, move on and the world will not function if nobody believes it. Because if you look at maths, for example, yeah, you can say, okay, 2 plus 2 does not equal 5. And logically, people would say that, okay, if people start believing in that on maths, that's wrong. But people believed in incorrect mathematics and incorrect science for decades and centuries, and society advanced. Like people were fine, like progress happened. So it's it is one of those things that things can advance even when the belief is wrong.
I think that touches on one of the things that philosophy is really good at is it's it can tell you when you're wrong in a very profound way, and it can show it in a place you would at least expect. There's a story about a Cambridge philosopher, Wittgenstein, who was walking in a corridor, and he comes across a woman who is studying at the college at the time, and she says, "It's funny that the Earth revolves around the sun because it looks like the sun revolves around the Earth." And Wittgenstein just kind of looks out the window and then he looks back at her and goes, "What would it look like if it was the other way around?" And then he just walks off. And she just sits there and she's confused. And then it suddenly dawns on her that it looks like the Earth is going around the sun. Sorry, it looks like the sun's going around the Earth, but the Earth is going around the sun. And that sentence alone sums up to me how many problems there are both in philosophy of language, that we struggle so much to communicate with each other as entities, so much about kind of the sense perception, how we can't trust the knowledge of our senses, so much about what the kind of the nature of reality is. What does it mean for something to revolve around another? From the Earth's perspective, it looks like one way. From the sun's, it looks like another. From a neutral perspective, it looks completely different. And that one kind of anecdote to me was I've always found Wittgenstein really hard to understand. I think most people do, and I would be lying if I said I really understood his philosophy. But that one simple kind of engagement in a hallway to me sums so much about why philosophy is such a fantastic subject. But like you say, time consuming, and you got to think about the real world. You can't spend your entire time arguing about books and things. And like you said, some people are going to have beliefs, you can't reason them out of it. If they weren't reasoned into it in the first place, you can't reason them out of it. I don't know who it was that said that, but that's something which teenage me didn't understand, but 20-year-old me
I've
does.
had
Yeah.
that. I've had that issue. Growing. I think everyone has that issue. Growing
Mm.
up, pretty much. But yeah, it is one of. But the other thing, the other thing that I've learned growing up is, even if you do persuade the other person, then what? Like, if I persuade somebody that 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 5, it equals 4, how is my life any better? Like, the coming to that realization is also profound, that, okay, even if I'm so good at persuasion, because it's at that point, it's not about fact, it's about your level of persuasion. Hence why, I feel like the legal system is heavily broken, because it's less about fact and more about the quality of the lawyer that can put together a case that can persuade the judge and the jury. So, because in reality, otherwise you would just have a list of facts on paper, or a list of proposed facts, and then it would be based on that, and an AI could judge that. Whereas it's more of a performance, and obviously, a performance by one lawyer might not be as good as another lawyer, but the first lawyer's proposal might actually be right and accurate, whereas the second might be misleading. But yeah, going back to philosophy and economics and trying to persuade people, that's something I feel like it took me a while to realize that, okay, I'll persuade somebody that I'm right, but what has that actually mattered? If that person isn't constantly in front of me saying that I'm wrong, constantly doing something that hinders my life, if they just happen to have a belief system, but they're going about their day and they're not bringing it up, realizing that it doesn't actually matter. It's like, take flat Earth, for example. I don't believe the Earth is flat. I believe it's round. And I feel like, as a teenager, if I had come across that concept in and people believed it, I would have tried to persuade them out of it. Whereas now I've got one or two friends that do believe it, but because it never comes up in conversation and we just enjoy each other's company within the confines of our, friendship, it it doesn't matter. It's like it's a belief that has no bit. To me, it's as important as him maybe liking noodles over tagliatelle.
Exactly. Yeah.
Pasta. Like it's so insignificant relative to the grand scheme of things. And I feel like as I'm getting older, as I'm growing as a person and having kids and a family, it's like so many things just don't matter. And then that goes back to the side of you've got to pay the bills, you've got to work, you've got to do things, you've got to enjoy your life. There's only so much philosophy that you can just constantly argue about. Or again, I would say it's important that people learn about philosophy and economics, but don't get so centered around it that you just don't enjoy your life. You don't enjoy what you are doing and enjoying.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly the right way to put it. And yeah, if someone's got a deeply held belief that you deeply disagree with, if you, it's not your job to try and convince them of a different position. It's your job to try and reconcile whatever it is you have to do to interact with them and make sure that you can still interact as people. I think the world would be a much better place if people were able to peacefully coexist with people with different opinions.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously a major issue if you start looking at religion, if you start looking at different politics, left, right, etc. But yeah, like that's definitely something I know a lot of people still to this day that are 50, 60 years old, that any chance they get they're basically they would never admit they're having an argument. They'll say they're having a constructive debate and they're trying to prove somebody is wrong and that they're right. And even if they are right, it's like, but to what end? Like it gets to a point where it does not matter.
I think
Because
that's yeah. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
yeah, I was just about to say, take, you like Python, for example. I'm not the biggest fan of Python, but if I just sit here trying to persuade every person that loves Python that, let's say, C++ is better, it's like, but, to what, end? Because at the end of the day, I understand that Python is a major language now. I understand that for machine learning, AI, Python, for better or for worse, that is, a way to go about it, and that's what a lot of researchers and developers and companies are using. But it doesn't. I don't stand to benefit from me persuading you that you're wrong about Python and
Oh,
that it's
completely.
not
Yeah,
the best language.
I think that's it's also it's kind of the difference between kind of trying to persuade someone and having an argument versus having an academic debate in the appropriate
Yeah,
context. And like I, for example, I love Python, but I would also never say necessarily it's the best language. I think it's the best language for certain things.
exactly.
Um, and actually, to be fair, my favorite language is not C++. It's C, which is the
Ooh,
bedrock of both languages. So like I think that's the most beautiful language that was ever written. And I think the modern world wouldn't be anything close to what it is without C and the work they did in the early 70s. But exactly, Python wouldn't exist without it. JavaScript wouldn't exist without it. All the operating systems we use wouldn't exist without it. And you get such a wonderful kind of blooming of several different languages which are all built on top of it, like C++, like Java, like Python, like JavaScript, all these families of languages. And I think if you have a debate within certain confines of why is X better than Y, for what reasons, and you're not necessarily trying to convince someone you're wrong or I'm right, you're trying to say, well, these are my reasons for thinking this in this particular environment, that's very productive. I mean, that's how humans learn, and it's the right way to do it. It's just, I think things like politics, religion, philosophy, economics, that's where being right is important, but it's not as important as peaceful coexistence.
yes, and I feel like that's something that a lot of people don't understand. I feel like people can get their head around not harming each other and not killing each other, and thinking, okay, if as long as you're not doing that, you're peacefully coexisting to some extent. But like it goes beyond that. Obviously, as we've discussed, having difference in opinion if I think you're wrong about something. Like, what does it matter me trying to constantly persuade you? I've got to enjoy my life. I've got to live my life. I have stuff to do. You have stuff to do as well, and you've got to enjoy and live your life. And there's definitely that fine balance. And I feel like if you start studying philosophy and economics, it gives you a better appreciation. If you go in with an open mind, it gives you a better appreciation of the world. And I've seen that in myself and other people that do openly, without any, prejudice or as much, lack of prejudice as, you can have, because you're going to have some. And when you start studying it, you do appreciate the world more. You start realizing, yeah, this thing just does not matter like in my day-to-day life, and you get a better appreciation of just life in general and enjoying life.
Absolutely.
So where do you see the next 5 years for SurveyMind? Obviously you've gone away from surveys. You're doing something slightly different with the transcribing and the summarizing. And obviously, there's a lot of new advancements coming out in AI. If you look at ChatGPT with it, GPTs as well, and obviously we can discuss that in a second. But where do you see SurveyMind specifically in the next 5 to 10 years?
So, I mean, I'd love for it to absolutely explode, and I think maybe it will. I think in the near to immediate term future, we're looking at potentially doing a fundraise at some point. We were thinking of doing it already, but actually we've pushed it back till we reached the more product market fit stage, which we're at right now. So that'd be kind of the short term ambitions: is keep finding this product market fit, keep building a good product, and potentially do a raise. 5 to 10 years. One of our early mentors said the phrase, "If you're building this product now with AI, what you need to make sure that you do is that this becomes the tool that sits on every researcher's desk. And if in 10 years' time we're on, say, 50% plus of qual researchers' desks, I'm going to be a very, very happy person." But it's just the journey to get there. There's a lot going on. And like you touch on, AI, it's such a non-linear timeline, AI. The amount of stuff which happens I mean, years happen in the space of weeks in AI. That whole open AI firing saga, I mean, that was months worth of news condensed into a couple of days just in the corporate world alone. The amount of the new technology, the speed at which these models are getting more powerful and can be run on smaller hardware, the kind of quantization process I'm a big fan of. The ability to get more out of fewer parameters, the ability to specialize models with specific types of fine tuning, specific types of model combinations. I think that's going to be an enormous place to look at. As a sector as a whole, I don't think we're anywhere near as close to AGI as some people seem to think. And I'm not necessarily qualified to say that myself. I kind of defer to people like Jan LeCun, who I've got a huge amount of respect for, and he very much says the same, that, look, this is not on the near-term horizon. There's a lot that still needs to be done before we even get close to that. But I think the amount of benefits that's going to come to business, that's going to come to personal computing, it's going to be like the internet in the early 90s to the late 90s, but even bigger, because people have Siri in their pockets, for example. They've got a lot of people use ChatGPT here and there. Quite a few people still haven't even touched it, and quite a few people don't even realize that things like DALL-E and Stable Diffusion exist in the image generation realm, and Whisper in the audio realm, and things like that. And all these tools are we're at the base of the kind of the S curve, as it were. We haven't even really begun the ascent yet. This is, if ChatGPT is kind of Netscape Navigator, this is 1993, 1994 in terms of the internet. We haven't even come close to the mass adoption that I think is going to come in narrow AI. We don't need AGI to make this the big thing. And AGI is, if it were very near, that would be very worrying. But I just don't think it's anywhere near as close as some people seem to think. And I think much bigger danger is bad actors, criminals, rogue states, terrorists getting access to the powerful narrow AI models and using them, or building their own proprietary closed source models and using them. Or the flip side of that is overregulation, making it regulatory capture and in the hand of a few small big tech companies who then control the entirety of the media output and the way we access to these machines. So, sorry, that's a very rambling answer, but for SurveyMind, I'd love for it to explode, and I'm really working on that. But AI as a whole, I mean, AI is going to explode, and it's going to be very fascinating to watch.
Oh yeah, and it's already exploding. And like you said, I agree. This is like the internet in the early days of the 90s. The question is it going to pan out over in the next 10, 20 years or the next 6 to 18 months? Because as you've said, the advancements in AI, like 12 months ago, ChatGPT wasn't really. I mean, obviously, it was a thing that's been developed. It's been a year that's come out now, but it wasn't things. It wasn't something that we was using, publicly. Whereas now, you can find a lot of people that have either heard about it or are using it to some extent. And even if they don't know, that they might be using it through some sort of, Chrome summary plugin, for example. So there's a lot of people that have access to some of these, LLMs one way or, another. And yeah, the advancements, that are happening are pretty crazy. And I do like that point that you touched on, that a lot of people do think that AGI is closer than, again, as you believe and I personally believe as well, it is. But the other thing is, what the last 6 to 12 months have shown is AGI might not be the thing that, the big thing. Like, we're getting so much stuff from LLMs, from generative AI, that it's like, okay, AGI is great and it's cool and it'll be very groundbreaking, but there's so much that can be done without AGI. And it's always that thing, AGI is going to be the big one. Without that, AI is just weak. But we've seen that, okay, using ChatGPT, it's like using Google but on steroids. It's like if Google was, a 2-year-old toddler, ChatGPT is Mike Tyson in the ring. Like, it's
That's a
like,
good
obviously,
analogy.
you've got to, figure out how to, use ChatGPT. Obviously, prompt engineering. I feel like that's a role, and like a specification of roles that all start becoming more and more popular. Prompt engineering, but once you figure out how to start leveraging it and what commands to use and when to also use it, you start to realize, like, why am I using Google? Why am I using all these, other tools? Them, like, on a daily basis, I'm using ChatGPT. I'm using it to summarize data or, format data, to, search for stuff. It's insane what you can do relative to Google, and then that's not even including plugins that you can get for it, or any extra libraries, or the GPT system that's been released as what 2-3 weeks ago now. So yeah, it is really crazy, and the advancements in AI and ChatGPT is like insane.
Oh, it's massive. I mean, that kind of November, December last year when it hit the scene. I've been playing with the GPT API for a long time before it, for about a year, and they're kind of the old school GPT-3 playground. So I knew what it could do. For example, with coding, I'd seen that. I remember it was around about July of last year, so about 18 months ago. I asked GPT-3 DaVinci to produce a CRM system using in Django. So kind of give me the exact code for the models, give me the exact code for the views, give me some base HTML templates, etc. And I was thinking, okay, it's gonna spit out rubbish, but it's going to be disjointed. There's not going to be any kind of, it won't have the understanding to link the model to the view and then link that to the template, etc. And I was blown away with the fact that it could do exactly that. Couldn't build a full scale application, and to my knowledge, it still couldn't right now. They haven't solved the long term memory issue well enough yet, but it clearly had it was able to, it had enough domain specific knowledge and understanding of the question problem of the problem statement to produce code which worked and was on point and integrated with each other. And you could actually, at that point, July 2022, cut and paste and put it into a project, and with a couple of tweaks here and there, have something up on your screen. And when you think that that's on the model, which I think they're trained by 2020 GPT-3. If I remember, by the end of 2020, they had that model. And then GPT-4 they'd been working on for a long time. And GPT-4, I mean, that could write full documentation for a project if you had enough tokens. I shudder to think just how much better these bigger models are going to be. The GPT-5s, if Facebook releases a larger version of Llama, anything else which comes out of the open source community which can compete with these things. Because I mean, Claude and Bard can do very similar things as well. Um, it's gonna destroy, not destroy, but it's going to replace a lot of jobs which are at the moment quite maybe rote or menial, but do have a large element of knowledge based intensity to them. Um, Graphic design is one, for example, where these image generation models, I really think that the tools which they've been learning for the last 20, 30 years, the illustrators, the Photoshops, a lot of that, I mean, surely that, I don't know much about these kind of fields, but surely that must be very, very soon being replaced by models which are AI first. I don't know enough, but I think that's going to happen to quite a few industries.
So that's, really interesting that you brought up that particular, field, that particular industry, artists, if, for example. My belief is slightly different. Right now, you've got two main, prevailing, schools of thought when it comes to AI and its disruptive nature on different industries. You've got the one which is very pro and, I guess rallying for it, saying that, oh, it's going to remove, artists for the most part. It's going to get rid of lawyers because you can do so much, through AI. It can do a lot of research. Doctors are going to be going away, etc., etc. Then you got the other school of thought, and a lot of this is from people that are within that industry, because I think partly they buried their head in the sand, partly they're too absorbed by their own, let's say, significance. And they're saying, it's not going to be able to replace me as an artist. It's not going to be able to replace me as a doctor, me as a lawyer, for example. It's just not going to happen. I've had this conversation, with doctors, not necessarily just to do with AI, just technology in general. And, they don't want to, believe that, or you'll replace them. And I feel like every year that goes by that it doesn't really majorly replace them, or there's like a technological advancement, and then they see that, oh, there's so many limitations to it. They see that as evidence that they can't be replaced, and it's just like, no, because it's just a stepping stone. My school of thought is in between. I feel like if you take the role of an artist, I feel like the role that of an artist today, let's take video game, be a bit more specific, a video game, visual effects artist, that role in 5 to 10 years in the future will not exist in the current state that it is. And what I mean by that is, if you take a secretary, for example, a secretary in the 1950s was very different to a secretary in 2023. The On paper, that role, that specific title, secretary, still exists. People are still secretaries, people are still assistants. But if you applied for a secretarial role today and had no experience using a mobile phone, no experience using, Excel, Word, email, computers, anything like that, and you had the skill set of a secretary back in the 1950s, you would not get a job. Like the times have changed. So you can say that a secretary role from the 1950s, that secretary does not exist anymore. That almost the industry hasn't gone. The actual role no longer exists, but it's because it's morphed. It's changed, and they've had to instead of technology taking over the role, its technology has been baked into the role. I don't think a lot of these AI advancements, no matter how good they are, I don't think they're going to do to their respective industries what electricity did to the wire oil industry, or what cars did to the horse and carriage industry. I think it's going to be a matter of, in 10 years, if you want to be a lawyer, it's going to be, okay, do you know how to prompt engineer? It probably won't even be called that. You'll be just code something else. And do you know how to leverage AI to improve your workflow? Because at the end of the day, people can Google and get legal advice, but people still use lawyers. Like Google did not eliminate lawyers, like, at all, like in no shape and form. Doctors are still in demand, even though you can Google, and with a bit of common sense, you can kind of self-diagnose. But people still use doctors because they want that professional experience. They want that professional sort of feedback. And I feel like people will still go to these trades. Yes, you may be able to whip up some concept art quickly using Dolly or some other generative AI instead of using a concept artist. But an artist and even concept artists will still be around in 5 to 10 years, in my opinion, but they'll just be leveraging tools a lot more, like AI tools. And in terms of stuff like Photoshop and Illustrator, or maybe even like Premiere Pro when you're looking into video editing, I don't think those tools will go away. I think one, they'll bake in AI into it and large language models to help the flow. And two, I feel like they'll maybe the initial stage, people might use some sort of generator, but they'll still use those pieces of software just the way people, for the most part, a lot of websites are still and applications are still made using code. It's not all WYSIWYG, it's not all Dreamweaver, even though that kind of was the promise of some of these, WYSIWYG tools that you wouldn't need to code anymore. That didn't go away. It just allowed a few extra people to get into it and have a go. That's my opinion. I think that's where AI is going to go. I feel like there's a lot of people right now that can really benefit from brushing up on the skills of AI and making sure they're well equipped. That would be the best way. And I feel like there's like people are too polarizing one way or another. Either they're going to destroy the industry, or that the AI is just not capable of doing anything like what they can do. But I think it's going to be the middle ground. And I feel like the artists, for example, that refuse to leverage these tools, that refuse to actually, embrace these new advancements, yeah, they will no longer have a job. It will get to that point, but that's not because the role of an artist has gone away. It's just the technical specifications have changed. And if they try to stay the same, they will no longer be able to find work.
No, that's a very interesting point, and I mostly agree with you, but I think it's a matter of. I mean, I think I certainly agree with you that some I certainly agree with your point that all technicians, and I use the word technicians to mean people who work in a knowledge
Mm-hmm.
intensive service capacity, are going to have to adapt
Mm-hmm.
because, like I mean, that's a very good analogy you made with kind of 1950s secretaries versus today's secretaries, totally different skill set. I think it's going to be a matter of proportion between how much of the work that is necessary at the moment that is currently being done by a large number of people. So legal AI is a big one where there's a large number of overworked, stressed out junior lawyers
Yeah.
who are just going through briefs and reading, preparing documents non-stop. Surely, that to me, that's the kind of thing that's a big expense for the law firms. They can suddenly cut back on. I imagine that must be a proportion where a lot of those junior jobs must go. But then again, how are you going to get the route to senior lawyer without having a junior lawyer? So there's going to still be at least some junior lawyers, for example.
Yeah.
Um,
Plus,
so I think,
plus,
yeah.
plus, also, if let's say a lot of that grunt work, because that's what it is with a lot of junior roles, whether that's in coding, whether that's in in the legal industry, that might get pushed onto AI. I think there'll still be the element of part of it being checked by humans, and that can be partly done by juniors. But again, I think it'll be that thing. Okay, their time has now been freed. We had the budget allocation to get 5 juniors this year. We'll probably still, hire these 5, in this imaginary situation, but what they'll be doing will be slightly different because
Mm,
what they was doing before has, for the most part, been offloaded to AI, for example. So again, it does come back to that thing of the junior role may no longer exist in its current state in 10 years. But again, you made that point. How do they go to being a senior and then a managing partner? Do they just immediately hire to managing partner out of university? We both know that's not going to happen.
mm. No, I think that touches on the issue, and it's one where, as a society, more so than anything else, we need to make sure that whatever the outcome this is in our specific industry or wherever it may be, we're prepared for both the worst case scenario and also a great case scenario, which would be if they had a budget for 5 juniors and those 5 juniors were slaving away over a desk for a long time. Now, do they have the capacity to do something more interesting? And maybe their pay goes down because they're not working 20-hour days anymore, but at least they've still got a job. I think in some situations, like I say, my background's in tutoring, and I know for a fact for high end tutors, there'll always be a market for high end personal tutors. But one thing that AI would have a fantastically positive application in would be giving everyone access free, essentially, to their own personal tutor. An AI bot who understands them, who knows their learning profile, who knows where they need help. One of the key things for a tutor is for a tutor to be patient, and that's the great thing about AI. It's infinitely patient. AI is never going to get bored. It's never going to be annoyed at being asked the same question 10 times in a row. Um, and so I think there's going to be a lot of benefit from applications where we can democratize access for a lot of people to services they otherwise couldn't have. And if that means that the economic effect is not job losses, but actually job reimaginings, that's probably not the right word. Job kind of people reinventing themselves as specialists using the AI tools in more creative ways, and they kind of direct the AI tools. I think that'll be great. But I am worried. I mean, some industries, translation is another one I often think about. Once the translation models are perfected and it can be done in near real time with earpieces, all those people that have spent years perfecting their language skills to become translators, are they going to be in 10 years' time as reliable as AI? Maybe not. Maybe they're not even going to be as fast as AI. Maybe AI is going to outperform them. And how do you have that? To me, that's if we kind of go back to the secretary analogy, that's a secretary who's a specialist dictation taker typist,
Mhm.
and that skill has now essentially gone. Um, I don't know how I don't know how you reimagine that job, for example. And I think those are where we can find places like that where it's hard to reimagine how their resources get well allocated, that we're prepared for job losses there.
Oh yeah, and obviously it's not to say that there won't be industry or whole sections of jobs that won't get eliminated. It's just I don't think it's going to happen like to the artists, to the lawyers, to the doctors, the way people are thinking. But yeah, that's a good industry and job to talk about is translating and summarizing. For example, AI is already doing a great job and it's only going to get better. But again, it is you as an individual, and this kind of comes back to a philosophical and economical aspect, you have to be willing to adapt. If you see, if the winds of change are, coming to you, and you can see they're a few years away, if you choose not to, act and you choose to put your head in the sand, that, it gets to a point where you're no longer what's the word I'm looking for? You're no longer uh, it's not the word innocent. You're no longer the. Do you know the word I'm looking for, Tom?
Um, kind of not off the top of my head, but master of your kind of your own fate in that sense,
Yeah, yeah,
maybe.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That is, what I'm saying. But the other, yeah, it gets to a point where you you can no longer offload the blame to someone else, and you've got to take the blame, for yourself. Because if, for example, there's let's say in an office building there's a hallway and you go through the hallway and a tile off the ceiling falls and hits your head. Okay, not your fault, but if you keep going down the hallway and there's tiles falling and nobody else is going down the hallway anymore, it gets to a point where you're responsible for that now. Like you've seen it happen long enough, and had it occurred to you that you can't offload the blame to someone. That's what I'm saying with this. It gets to a point where, okay, if you've had 5 to 10 years to, change career or slightly skill up a bit, if you don't, that's obviously your fault.
absolutely.
Like it's not happening tomorrow. It's not even happening next year, but it's happening in many industries, and I feel like that's just something that a lot of people just aren't, taking seriously and are either leaving it too long. You've seen it with industry disruptors like Airbnb and Uber. I remember talking to people that I knew were taxi drivers, like family members, and talking to them about it when it wasn't even available in the area yet, or it was very rare. And I was like, this is already happening in America. It's kind of here in the UK in certain major cities. but it's gonna happen. Start jumping on this, and they had a million excuses, and now they've had to jump on it, but they had none of the initial benefits of the decent pay that you got initially. They obviously, there'll be people that was on it from day one, and they probably got really good reviews, so people want to go with them, and they figured out how the system works. It gets to a point where, okay, if you've been a taxi driver for 20 years and you saw this coming 5 years ago, but you refuse to change, it's no longer somebody else's fault. It's your fault. Like, you've refused to change.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy and a good way of thinking about it. It's 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 not so much about collective responsibility; it's about individual responsibility for your own role and making sure that you adapt to the new technology. I think something I slightly worry about is I often compare AI to the internet revolution. The internet revolution killed a lot of jobs, but it didn't destroy the economy. The
No.
unemployment didn't go up massively. But I think that it made a lot of work, and maybe this is just the modern world, made a lot of work less meaningful. People find less meaning in their jobs. Not everyone, but there's certainly a kind of a modern malaise. People aren't feeling connected to their communities, connected to their jobs, connected to their careers as much as, on my understanding of it, 30, 40, 50 years ago they did. And I hope that when AI redistributes economic resources, it does so in a way that doesn't mean that people do even more disconnecting jobs, even more jobs where they feel like they're just pushing buttons and not producing anything. It actually allows them to be more creative, to be more fulfilled. And if the end result is that they have more free time, that they're able to use that free time and maintain the same basic standard of living. I think a lot of this will tie into bigger conversations around things like UBI and the way to deal with how these AI systems get deployed. I mean, we talk about generative AI in this conversation. We've been under the control of AI in social media with the algorithm for a lot longer than the last year and a half.
Oh yeah.
And that kind of conversation hasn't really
And
been
media and
mentioned. Yeah,
marketing agencies. So yeah, like, it's been
exactly.
around, and it's had a major influence. And obviously, it's good, interesting that you brought up, universal basic income. UBI is something that I'm a overall big proponent for. I think it'll be, personally, a good thing. But again, obviously, it's, figuring out how do we deploy it. Because obviously you do get people that are lazy, but again, do you have some sort of certification system that they have to go through to, be able to get it? Is it just a blank check for everyone? What's the amount? The ramifications of that. Like, and we're talking about AI, and we're talking about how it could, affect, work, and, reduce, certain roles and the involvement. It reminded me of the quote from John Maynard Keynes when he talks about a 15-hour work week. This was about 100 years ago. He talked about 15-hour work week will be the norm,
Mm.
and then nobody will have to, which is roughly about 2 days, effectively. So a 2-day work week will be the norm in the 21st century, and it's far from that. Like, if anything, people are working more hours because they can bring their laptop home, they have their phone with emails. Before, most of the work, if you was not in the office, you pretty much could not do the work. You could potentially think about it, but that's as far as the advancement in your work could go. But now you could have your laptop, it could be 11 p.m., and you could be, doing some research, you could be writing something, you could be writing some code. Like, there's so much work now that can be done after 5 p.m. whilst you're at home, whilst you're commuting, whilst you're on holiday. And I think there's an element of that and social media, because you mentioned that there's a disconnect between work and people's sort of, I guess, satisfaction from work. I mean, part of it is just one that would, there's so many more hours that we are either doing or we feel like we should be doing. And then combined with social media, like 50 years ago, if you wasn't doing that well, you didn't really have much exposure beyond a few core, friends and family members to compare yourself against. Now you could be earning £1 million a year at the age of 30, but then you look online and then there's somebody earning 10 million a year that's like 16 years old, for example. And on the surface of it, earning £1 million a year at the age of 30 is great. Like, that is by virtually every measure, just from a financial perspective, a huge success. But when you look on social media, you seem like a failure. And I think that's a huge problem that we have as a society now. Is there's so many ways of comparing, and then comparing to the point where we do just seem like a failure in some realm in our life, and as a result, we kind of feel disconnected. I think there's an element of that as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's a classic example of a technology which was intended to connect people and bring people
I know.
together, and it's done the exact opposite.
Mm.
So AI could very easily be something which we use to power up and get. I mean, that's a classic example. Suddenly, we've got a tool which gives anyone with a keyboard the ability to produce artwork, which literally 2 years ago would have cost several £1,000s to go and get a graphic designer to produce. What are we going to do with that? Are we going to now get thousands and thousands of briefs and have to go through every single brief whenever we want to get a piece of art and fill people's time up like that with kind of making work to fill the time? Or, like you say, can we go down to a 4-day work week? That ties in a bit with the kind of the UBI consideration as
Yeah.
well. How can we get a lot? I look at the data security point a lot for SurveyMind and think about kind of ownership of data. I think people are going to learn, like, at some point, rather than kind of discussing the regulation of AI, it'll be about how does the AI interact with you? What do you want it to know about you? What do you not want it to know about you? Because it's very easy. I mean, that kind of doom scrolling paradigm, I know how it rules a lot of people's lives, myself included, when I kind of go on YouTube Shorts. I can spend half an hour and have done nothing because it knows
The amount
exactly what
of
I want
I've
to
done
watch
that,
next.
and it's frightening.
Yeah, it's just it eats up time in such a bad way. We want to make sure as a society that it gives us that time productively, and if not productively, for our kind of like better human flourishment.
Oh yeah, and like obviously, we're talking about this, reducing the number of hours working, maybe not 2 day, but like 4 day work week. And I know some companies have, deployed that and seems to have been successful in the initial term. Obviously, long term, how it will affect companies, humans as on an individual and a family level, and the society as a whole, let's say over 20, 30, 50, 100 years, is obviously still to be, seen. The problem I have with stuff like this, especially when we're talking about like a 15-hour work week, 2 day work week, is that with AI, yes, we can talk about how it could potentially bring this on, but will companies, because those are the people that are hiring people, and they're the ones setting the hours, setting the rules. Because if a company says your work week is 15 hours and you agree to it, then your work week is 15 hours. If your work week is 60 hours and you agree to it, then your work week is 60 hours. Like, it's what you agree to with the employee. Yes, there are certain rules in place in law to prevent overwork, for example, but 40 hours is by no means the upper limit of what the legal system allows.
Oh,
Like,
completely, yeah.
yeah, exactly. The problem I have with these notions that AI or technology might get to a lower, work week, is that will a company say, okay, we can get the same output from half the hours, so just 2 to 2.5 days, per week. Are we happy with that amount? Instead of saying, okay, we can get this twice the output from the same amount of hours by leveraging this technology. And it only takes one company in 10 companies to have that belief system, that the other 9 are like, we can no longer compete unless we are doing the same way, because the other company that does not mind continuing a 5 day work week, for example, by same number of hours, same number of employees, will advance more. They'll probably have more output. They'll be the one who has the monopoly. They'll be the industry leader. We as competitors, we as participants within the market, do not want that. And obviously, naturally, you as a company, you as an individual wouldn't want that. And then let's talk about it on another level. If, let's say, 40 hours a week, you for a particular role, the remuneration is £50,000 a year. We'll keep numbers simple. We'll just keep the example simple. Let's say £50,000 a year, and let's say with 15 hours, with some new advancements in technology like AI, employees can produce the same amount in 15 hours, and they're like, okay, we want the same amount of money, £50,000. That's fine. But what if somebody comes along and says to the company, I will work 40 hours. I will use this technology so I can get 2 to 3 times the output now versus the person who's doing 15 hours for £50,000, but I will work for no penny extra. I will work for the £50,000 that you used to pay for the full week that people are now only working for 15 hours. The employer is going to think, okay, obviously I'm going to do that. And then that becomes the norm. And that's what they ask and expect of, employees and future employees. That's the problem I have, is that I feel like on practice, a lot of these ideas that technology can, reduce the amount of hours worked and, being overworked. But okay, AI might, like, you take junior lawyers, for example, they might be overworked because they're, going over a lot of legal documentation, a lot of grunt work. Once that's offloaded, do they just say, okay, we'll let our junior employees, while still paying them, work less? Or do we either A, get them to do something else and work them in a different way, and or do we B, say, okay, we no longer need 5 junior guys, we only need 2, let's just get rid of the 3? Like, that in itself is a different problem. I've got a friend who I've had on the podcast, a few times, and he has a Web3 blockchain, now AI agency, which had about 300 people about a year or so ago, and it has 100 now because of how much they've leveraged AI. And he said his output is now roughly 20 to 30% more, even though his number of employees is down by about 2/3. Like,
Wow.
he went down the decision of, okay, we can keep roughly the same amount of output, but actually they've gone a bit more. But let's just say it's the same by reducing the number of employees, hence reducing cost.
I mean, what you kind of touched upon there is so many different aspects of just how revolutionary this is going to be.
Yes.
Because I mean, there's so many different questions which I don't think anyone necessarily has the answer to. But once you've got the ability to, let's take that Web3 example, take 2/3 off the staff amount, yet double the output, you're essentially saying each worker can do, what's that, 6 times the output that he could do before. And that's in what, 1 year of this kind of AI revolution, having mainstream tools available. Very quickly, within 3 years of that, you're going to be able to produce, is that right? 216, like one worker can produce the output of an entire company, if that was to scale. And obviously, it won't scale exactly like that. But we're going to very, very quickly get to the point where knowledge intense work, the technician roles, are going to be zero marginal cost, in the same way that word processing, presentation building, a lot of things are already. That, take diagnostics in the case of a doctor. The value at the moment is the training of the doctor for 7 years at university, doing the junior, 5 years of specialism, and that doctor has then got the skill set to, when you then go and see them for the 15-minute, 30-minute appointment, you're not paying for the 15, 30 minutes, you're paying for that 12 years worth of training, so that when you tell the doctor the symptoms, they can give you the diagnosis. Now, once you've offloaded that to an AI model, that's zero marginal cost for every extra diagnosis. So how on earth do you price that? What company is going to go out and say, right, we're going to provide diagnoses for 99 cents a diagnosis? Because at some point, someone's going to build a model or a selection of models which can do that. And then and it's going to be as accurate or even more accurate than doctors. I don't. That's where I err on the side of, we've seen it happen in certain domains before. I mean, agriculture is the classic example where it's now essentially a zero marginal cost industry. Media has adapted in a very strange way with kind of Netflix and streaming to zero marginal cost there. but knowledge intense tasks like diagnoses, like graphic design, like eventually music production, game production, uh, media itself, kind of the limitless creative possibilities there. Um, Pricing is going to be really hard, and the flip side of that is employment and wages is going to be very hard because one's a function of the other. Um, for example, we're having this issue of transcription and summarization because it's not human time. We're thinking, are we doing cost plus pricing? Are we doing value based pricing? Are we doing equivalent market set pricing? And it's very, very hard because our cost structure is completely different to that of a traditional transcription platform, which will mostly be paying the transcribers for their human hour time and then doing a cost plus based on that. Um, Obviously, we have large fixed costs with running the servers. I think it's going to be that's a huge economic question, and I don't think we've got really good answers to it. Us as a society have yet.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that as a society we need to have these discussions, these almost discussions without a end goal, like an end purpose. Like you might have a discussion about a new app design, a pay like the homepage, and the end goal might be to agree on a layout. Like there's a specific end goal and something that you can achieve in a meeting or two. But there are discussions like these that need to literally just be discussions where it's not about being right or wrong. It's not about getting a conclusion, but it's about having these, conversation. Because I know I'm thinking about certain things that I probably wasn't thinking about now that I've I'm talking to you, and I'm hoping that there's certain aspects about AI and the effects of it on on the economy that you're thinking about that you may not have thought about before you came on this podcast and we had this discussion, because otherwise you have this very very narrow lens that you think, okay, it's definitely going to be like this. But if you don't have these open discussions, you just don't realize, okay, what if this one little parameter does change, or what if this happens? That just totally messes it all up.
Completely. I mean, maybe it's the case that it's the with all technology, you can only kind of view it in hindsight
Yeah,
and
there's that.
explain it after the fact. But I think this is the. I mean, there are so many different problems, but this is one which I think about a lot, and I'd love. I'm looking forward to the day when I can look back and say, oh, obviously it was going to be X is how we solve that or something, because I don't see what that is right now.
Yeah, and what I find funny with AI is over the years, it's always been talked about it's going to replace the menial, labor intensive jobs, stocking shelves, doing, bricklaying, for example, drive. Obviously, that's the big one, driving,
Mm.
for example. And though there are advancements in those areas, over the last 12 months, the main conversations have been around technical, intellectual jobs, lawyers, doctors, writers, coders. Like that's where like ChatGPT. Nobody's talking about ChatGPT and saying, "Oh, is he going to replace builders?" Like, they're talking about it potentially transforming the coding industry, the legal industry, the medical industry, the research industry. All of that side of it. It's the intellectual side, and I feel like that's something that kind of came out of nowhere, because when you used to see it in comics or in sci-fi, it was always that the manual jobs, cleaning for example, was going to be replaced by technology. It was never about, oh, me as an artist was going to get replaced.
Absolutely. I mean, that was far and away the big surprise. Everyone was thinking it was going to be self-driving cars first, and that keeps getting pushed back year after year after year. Um, it's fascinating that it seems like the knowledge intense ones are the ones that are being disrupted first. And if you've got a nurse, a doctor, and a surgeon, it looks like the doctor's the one who's the most at risk at the moment, and then potentially the surgeon, and actually the nurse, the human touch, the palliative care when it's needed, the understanding, the ability to touch someone on a human level, that very much is not going to be replaced anytime soon. And I don't think that we'll go back to kind of the AGI. I think it would take a long, long time before we get anything that could just closely approximate that. So I'll be willing to be proved wrong.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember having this, conversation with my auntie about probably about 6 years ago now. And I remember she, because we was talking about technology, I remember she asked me that she had the conversation with someone else that was saying, doctors or nurses, which one are going to, again, it wasn't really AI, it was just technology, in general, which one's going to get replaced. And she was saying, nurses. And I said, I think it'll be doctors first. I was like, the amount of times I've seen a doctor and it's less empathy related and more, fact and analysis related. Again, humans are still great at analyzing and looking at something and maybe poking and prodding, for example. But it was more analytical, whereas the role of a nurse, like you said, is a bit more being empath, having empathy, being a bit kinder. These sort of things that a lot harder for AI. It is a lot more emotional, and yeah, like it is the knowledge based roles that are definitely being disrupted, whereas the more lower paid, traditionally, more physical roles are definitely harder, because when you actually look at it, the other problem with these physical roles, whether it's nursing, whether even doctors to an extent as well, whether it's driving, for example, lane breaks, electrician, anything like that, is the ramifications of getting that wrong are pretty devastating.
Oh yeah, I mean people's lives will be on the line there.
Exactly. Whereas the ramifications of a piece of artwork not being quite correct, or something being summarized, there's not that it's not that big of a deal in the short term for most applications. Nobody's gonna die. Like at worst case, you might get some information, or somebody's artistic style might be copyrighted. Like that's it. Right, that's pretty much as far as it goes to. Whereas if the wrong care is given, or let's say if it was a technology or a computer, a robot was installing electrical wire in a house, if that was just not done correctly, that could mean a whole family of five could be dead tomorrow.
Oh, completely. Yeah, I think also with the driving question as well, it's the case of where it's very hard to take a gradual approach to self driving because it's not so much the self driving cars which are going to have accidents, it's going to be the combination of the self driving cars with the human driven cars and that difficulty to kind of match those two things together. Once everyone's on a self driving car, all the cars will be talking to each other. It'll be a stable, predictable system. But obviously, to get to that point, it's highly likely we may have to end up banning human-driven cars, and that's a whole democratic minefield that I don't think any Western democracy is going to be able to fight. So I don't know how the self-drive. I'm not an expert at all in self-driving cars, but I've always thought that's going to be the difficulty is getting people past the point of the initial integration of self-driving.
Oh yeah, plus just the legal side of it. Because if you look at, I've got a Tesla. I'm in the UK, and the full self-driving capabilities are nowhere near as good as they are in America. I've seen videos of how they are in America. It's not really a technical limitation. Partly there's data and the roles are different, but for the most part, it's not a technical limitation. It's legal. Like the UK and EU doesn't allow it. And what do you do then? Like,
Yeah.
it's literally stopped it in its track, even though it's technically capable. Whereas partly, there's a safety element. Then partly you could say, maybe there's certain parties that have a vested interest that it benefits them to stop it. Whereas stopping ChatGPT from summarizing text, nobody's really probably going to put laws into place that will stop that for the next 10 years. Whereas that's what they've done with self-driving. Like, it's a number of years that UK is behind, US.
Oh, completely. I remember seeing that video. I think it was about 2 3 years ago where they did the fully autonomous drive all the way from LA to San Francisco, and that was with one self driven car. And I'm sure they've done hundreds of them now, maybe even thousands. I'm very much. I'm not in the self-driving space. But I was thinking, wow, and yeah, that's they haven't done that to the best of my knowledge anywhere in the UK yet,
No.
and I don't think they're gonna. It's going to be a bold government that takes on those vested interests here. America's definitely much more entrepreneurial, much more risk taking, and open to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and plus with America, because they have different states and they have different, laws. I know they have their, the laws that are overall in America, but then each state has their own laws. It only takes one of those states to, San Francisco, California, to, actually do it, and they show it works. Then all the other ones are like, America did it. It's not San Francisco did it; it's America did it. Let's start rolling it out now. Whereas if Germany does it, UK is not gonna, even if they were still part of the EU, ignoring ignore Brexit. If UK was still part of the EU, UK is not just gonna suddenly jump up and say Germany's done it. Let's immediately put it in because we're all European. It's gonna be like, okay, hold on. We're England, they're Germany, they're France, they're Spain. Let them do their thing. Like, they're a different country. They have a different economy. They have a different, a financial system. We're not 100% linked with them. So
Oh yeah, and also we got to have. I don't know how it works in most of Europe, but in the UK, for example, it's very hard to have different local laws to elsewhere. Whereas I know,
yes,
kind of in is it Phoenix? Is that right? Where they've got pretty much as most relaxed rules as possible on self driving. So I think you can get kind of self driving taxis now in Phoenix. Is that right?
I mean, I
Uh,
don't know, but that doesn't surprise me because obviously in America there's so many different states, so many different rules for those states, and they obviously each state will have, because the due to the size of the states, like some of those states are bigger than like countries in the EU.
oh yeah,
So like there's only so much governing that they can do. Where if they just have one set of rules for all of the states, it gets to a point where it's not a matter of, okay, AI is good or bad. One state might be really cold, one state might be really warm, and the laws for that suit a cold state may not suit a warm state. So they'll need their individual laws.
oh completely, yeah.
So yeah, like self-driving, and that's where you need to, where you just need to see, like, there's definitely been a lot of, halting in the technical, say, implementation, especially in the UK and over in EU as well, but especially in the UK, and that's just legal. There's nothing more to it than the government saying, no, we can't do it. Because I was reading that the UK government is very strict about self-driving, that like there's certain requirements where it has to, for it to be able to drive on a certain road, it has to be able to approach that road at a certain angle, at a certain speed, at a certain distance from the curb. And I'm thinking, no humans doing that.
Yeah,
No, if you said to some human, you've got to approach you at this angle within like 2-3 degrees of error, at this speed, at this distance from the curb, I don't think Stig from Top Gear is going to do that.
no, no.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's permanently under the strictest driving test you could possibly imagine, 24/7. I
Yes.
mean, I think it's good because I'm a huge believer that I don't drive. I can't drive, and I look at driving. I probably should learn to drive eventually, but I've always been thinking, oh, I'm sure self driving is just a couple of years away. Why
I know a
learn
lot of people
now?
that have been,
Yeah.
say that, and then they kind of just end up driving because they're like, oh, it's going to be a while.
If I hit 30, 35, and I'm still saying it, I will eventually learn to drive. But it's one where the fatalities in driving is very high. It's statistically way less safe than trains, planes,
Hmm.
all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure I'm sure autonomous driving, self driving cars will bring the fatality down, probably by an order of magnitude. I don't have any data to back that up, but that's my
Long
understanding of
term,
it.
yes, I
Yeah,
believe the same. There might be that intermediary period where, because either human error or the technology is quite not there, they might spike. And I feel like people that are anti self-driving for whatever reason, whether they're the taxi companies, whether they just don't believe in the technology, may use that as a data point to be able to try and ban it. But yeah, long term, I agree. Once everything's on it, it's I think it's going to have a huge impact on safety.
I'm sure you're absolutely right, because one car accident death won't make the news because it's human driving in a car happens at hundreds of times a day. Whereas one self-driving car death, even if it's one in a million journeys, that's new, that's novel, so it will make the news. And you're absolutely right. There's going to be vested interests, taxi firms, like you say, who have a vested interest in not letting this technology out the bag.
Yeah, but and that's the thing with statistics; they can be skewed so much. Like you could have one death last year from self-driving in the UK. If you have three deaths this year, you instead of saying there's only two extra people have died, even though 10 million new self-driving cars are on the road, they could, put the article as three times as many deaths have occurred from self-driving vehicles as last year. That sounds pretty bad if you
Oh
put it
yeah,
that way. Three times as much, or there's an increase of 200% extra. Whereas when you look at it, you'd be like, okay, there's been a lot more new self-driving vehicles, but only two extra deaths relative to the amount of people that pass a test and then have an accident, or that lead to a death. Whereas again, it's that thing, people will believe what they see. They won't say, okay, 2 plus 2 does not equal 5. They'll just be like, okay, I've been told that it equals 5. I guess it does.
yeah. It's people will skew the statistics. People will fight tooth and nail on this. I'm sure it'll happen in Gen AI as much as it happens with self-driving, but
Oh, 100%.
it's it just adds that extra layer of complexity to all these things. And I'm sure there's going to be, when you ask that question about what's in the next 5 to 10 year horizon for SurveyMind, I'm sure dealing with things like this is going to be a big issue for not just SurveyMind, but for every AI company dealing with the regulatory landscape.
Have you sat in a, like, it'd be mainly Tesla, I guess, in this country, a self-driving vehicle, as much as it can be self-driving in this country, and then had it on self-driving mode?
No, I would absolutely love to, but no, I've never had the opportunity.
I mean, it's again like I say, I've got a Tesla Model Y, and we've got the full self-driving, package. Still missing some features because obviously, in the UK, and then they swapped over to Tesla Vision instead of the ultrasonic, the radar sensors. But it's fantastic. Like on the motorway or an A road, that's predominantly what I use. I just whack it into self-driving, and I'm just sitting there and just making sure everything's all right.
That's so cool. Yeah, no, I think that's I would love to experience that.
Are you London based?
Yeah, I'm based up in Finchley Road.
Okay, so yeah, in London, you probably wouldn't, especially central London, you probably wouldn't get to use it too much right
Yeah,
now.
no, I can imagine. I imagine that's probably the worst kind of like environment for it as well, with pedestrians. Literally, I mean, I'm guilty of it myself, being a pedestrian, but not looking each way, etc. And that's going to really test those systems to the max.
Yeah, I mean, forget the pedestrians, the other drivers.
Yes.
Every
Yeah.
time I go, because again, I lived in London for a year, but I wasn't a driver at the time. Actually, I mean, I had a license, but I didn't have a car. I just took the underground. But I've been to London, especially after getting married. We go for a weekend or a day out, and obviously when I'm driving, I'm having to deal with the London drive. I'm like, how are they driving? It's like the
Yeah.
animals have just escaped the zoo. I'm I was like, what's this taxi driver doing? I've, the lights have gone for half a second, and he's already beeping and overtaking and mounting the curb as if it's the end of the world.
No, this is exactly why I've been put off from learning to drive, because I'd have to learn in London, and honestly, I don't think you could pay me to do it.
Nah, yeah, I can understand. Like in London, and plus the infrastructure's there that you don't really need to. Like with the underground and the trains, and even the buses as well, if you want to go down that route, and then the amount of bicycle lanes if you're into biking as well, and the accessibility of renting a bike is so prevalent that there's so many alternatives that you could, and it's actually sometimes quicker. Obviously I lived in London. Sometimes it's just quicker just to grab the underground than it is to get in a car, find parking, pay for parking, etc., etc.
Oh, I'm sure it would be. Yeah, I mean, I've got by for all my life, just literally the tube and the bus. There's lots of things which London's not great on, but public transport, it is pretty darn good.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think overall UK in general has a good grasp on public transport compared to some other countries. And the accessibility of it from a financial perspective, like it's pretty accessible.
Oh yeah, I mean, even I go to America a couple of times, and I grew up there actually when I was a kid, and they've got public transport. You've got to have a car. There's just no public transport. Even New York, whereas good public transport, very good by American standards, it's still got nothing on London.
Oh yeah, like UK has done a great job at that. And I feel like it's one of those areas of the UK that gets ignored, when the UK is being talked about. I mean, people talk about the NHS is definitely a big one. Yeah, I feel like that's the main one, and the fact that education is free up to university, and before that, it's relatively decent, for what it is. I'd say. I think there's definitely huge problems. Definitely if you look at the original, Prussian education system and where the modern education system is derived from. But I think that's a less of a UK issue and just more of a worldwide issue. But overall, I think it's pretty decent considering it's free and accessible by like anyone.
Oh, completely. It's there's. I'll be the first to moan about a lot of things about the UK, but education and healthcare, the fact that it's free at the point of access and is as good as it is, uh, already leaps and bounds ahead of so many other countries. I always compare to America and just think about the healthcare there, and healthcare and public transport alone are a good reason to be thankful to live in the UK, not the USA.
Oh yeah, like it's crazy that I've seen some of the healthcare bills over there, and like how drastically different it is from one, let's say, hospital to a hospital that's 10 minutes down the road. Because it's not even like there's a consistent pricing where if you know you're going to go in for this, it's going to cost roughly this. So you're like, okay, do I go in or not? Like it could be difference of hundreds and tens of thousands. That's just insane.
Yeah, and I remember hearing a couple of horror stories about kind of being pregnant and coming out and being
Yes, those are
charged
the ones I've been
five figures.
hearing about.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it is crazy, especially considering I've had a child last year, and then I've got another child on the way as well. And obviously,
congratulations.
thank you very much. And like, obviously in the UK, you don't have to think about the cost of birth. Like obviously you've got to buy stuff for the child, but you have to do that in any country. But then like say you hear about people just getting like bill with 10,000, like $100,000, and they was given jack all, and will sometimes like I've heard horror stories where they'll say if you want to hold your baby after birth, it'll cost you extra this much, and
No
it's
way,
like.
that is outrageous.
Like, I've heard about that, or like, I think I even heard like if you want the baby wrapped in a towel, but you need it, but they need to be wrapped in a towel, so they're basically forcing the charge on you.
That I mean, that doesn't surprise me, but that is absolutely outrageous. Can't get
Yeah,
my
and
head
it's just
around
like
that.
at that point, any sane person, whether you're a politician or just a civilian in society, needs to look at it and be like, that's just money grab. Like that is just pure capitalist money grabbing at that point.
Oh, do you have you lived out in the states yourself? Is that something you've come
No,
across, or
I've
no?
I've never been in America. I do want to visit there, on holiday, but I've never been. But again, I've seen stuff on the news. I've researched it, and I have a good grasp of how the system works over there.
Yeah, no, it's very. It's just. They say it's what is it? It's two countries separated by a common language, but that is definitely kind of the UK versus the USA.
Mm. Oh yeah, 100%. So as we're approaching the end of our podcast today, one thing that I always do is have a bunch of fun questions to lighten the mood. Before we wrap up, the rapid fire. Are you ready for them, Ran?
Absolutely, let's go for it.
Okay, so the first one, this will be interesting because you're already running your own company. Would you rather run a 10-person company or a 1,000-person company, and why? And like a follow up question, because I don't think we really covered this. How big is SurveyMind? Like, how many people do you have, including yourself? And are you guys bootstrapped or have you been funded?
Yep. So on that kind of the first question, 10 versus 1,000. My former company, Cavendish, we got to a team of about 40 tutors and an admin team of four of us, and that was really good fun. That was peak pandemic. Had a very kind of everything was remote because of the pandemic, but we got a nice kind of environment together. Had a fantastic admin team. Every single one of those tutors was great. I enjoyed working with them, and we also got very lucky with some lovely clients as well. So I really enjoyed that. I've never had the experience of running a 1,000-person company. I would love to have it one day. So I'd have to say that just purely because it's an experience I haven't had, and I'd love to experience it.
Okay.
And then on SurveyMind, we're bootstrapped at the moment, but looking, like I said, to do our first funding at some point in 2024. And it's a small team of 4 at the moment. My co-founder Alex, myself, and then we have some specialist interns. Actually, 4 or 5 because it depends on which interns are around. But a couple of specialists working here and there. And we're looking to expand once we get some funding.
Okay. And would you rather have £5 million up front or half a million a year for the rest of your life, and why?
Ooh. Um, I mean, I've got to say, 5 million up front versus half a million rest of the life. It's got to be. I'm only 28, so I've got to say half a million a year and hope that I live longer than 10 years, because I don't trust myself to be able to invest 5 million and get better than a 10% return. So I'm going to go with that option. I mean, yeah, I always think that. Not that I was in it. I've seen the studies which say that money makes you happy up to a point, and then after that does nothing. And I think that point, most of the studies would agree, is once you can comfortably cover the necessities and get out of debt. And I would say possibly the one thing above that in the UK is being enough to afford an own home. If I can get
Yes.
to that level, everything above
Obviously,
that
and
is just
especially
gravy.
being in London, trying to afford a home in London, like UK in general is difficult, but in London, like getting more than like a cardboard box.
Oh yeah, no, impossible.
I know it's crazy. Like so some of the price sometimes when I have a look just out of curiosity, the prices of stuff, and I'm like half a million for that. I'm like it's a shoe closet.
Yep. No, I was looking at houses about a year and a half ago, and a lot of them, like a half million, gets you a loft conversion, a roof conversion, one floor, one bed, one
Yeah, or a
bath,
studio or something.
studio. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
if it's a little nearer the
crazy.
station or a little nearer central. Again, we're not talking central. We're talking about a little nearer.
Oh yeah, this was zone free. Like
Yeah,
that's a for context for non-London listeners. That's quite far out.
yeah. It is pretty crazy, but those are the prices. And I think again, same with New York. New York's crazy as well. Tokyo's crazy. I mean, Manchester and Birmingham are getting pretty crazy for the prices as well now.
That's what I've heard. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean it is because I'm originally from the West Midlands in Dudley, West Bromwich, Wolverhampton areas. So Birmingham was always nearby, and that was the thing that I used to always compare it to. And Birmingham was it was a bit more expensive, but it's never London prices. And now you're looking at it, and you're just like, it's like okay, you might not be a million, but if you're half a million or 600 grand for something like the extra 400 grand almost makes no difference. Like
yeah.
it pretty much puts most people out of being able to afford it. So you might as well just whack it up to the million. Like it's that's the point that it's getting to. That so many places are so unaffordable, and in Manchester as well.
Oh yeah. No, I'm my friends, my entire generation, my cohort. I, it's the only people I know who've been able to get there have had a lot of help, or they've got very, very lucky, um, or in some unfortunate situations where it's been an inheritance or things like that. It's very, very hard. I don't know anyone who's managed to do it entirely off their own bat in London. I know people who've done it entirely off their. I'm originally from Kent, in Canterbury area. I know people who've done it on their own around there. But in London, I don't know anyone who's done it off their own bat.
Yeah, it is extremely difficult unless you do have some really high paying job. Like, and when
Mm.
I'm talking about high paying, I'm talking well over 100k, even well over 200k. Like, yeah, because once you factor everything in, especially with a bit of lifestyle inflation as well, and if you do want to have a bit of fun in London, it's so expensive, and obviously, the rent will just kill you initially, and then you find it difficult to save. So yeah, it is very difficult. I mean, UK in general, it's what you can get now versus just 20 or even just 10 years ago.
Yeah,
It is.
it's a different world.
Oh yes, and I feel like that's not something that's gonna, even though a lot of people feel like there's gonna be a reset. I don't think there's gonna be a permanent reset. Have you seen over the last few years have been discussing a multi-generational mortgage package?
That's no, I haven't seen that, but I can imagine it, and that's just That's that's really sad.
I know
No other word for it.
they're talking about like 50, 60 year, mortgages where, obviously usually you have it for like 25 to 35 years typically for
Yeah.
residential. And then, the idea is if you get it when you're, let's say 30, by the time you've retired at about, I think retirement age is 67 now. So by the time you're mid 60s, you've paid it off. And then, you take your pension if you think the pension's going to pay out, etc., etc. That's a conversation for, a different day. But that's how it would work. But they're talking about multi-generational. When I heard that, I was like, there's just so many problems with that, ignoring the, I say, moral and ethical side of it and just happiness. The thing is, when you go and get a mortgage, they do so many checks on you, affordability, your credit history. If you say, like, if they're going to say that, okay, when we're going to give you a 60-year package, you're 35, we know you're probably only going to do about 30 years worth more of work, maybe a bit more. The rest is going to be on your kid. You don't know how that kid's going to end up. You don't know if that kid's going to be capable of work physically, mentally, if they're going to get a high paying job, capable of that mortgage, if they're going to want to live in that house. All of these factors, they're just such an unknown compared to how many checks they actually do on an individual. It just feels like people just have not thought that through. That
No,
idea
not at
of,
all. That seems like it's fraught with so many issues. Yeah. No, I can't. I can't. I can't. I really hope that doesn't catch on.
no, I think
Yeah.
again, I don't know if it's a multi generation. I think it's a super long. I think Japan did introduce a 40-year mortgage. Again,
Hmm.
that's already long, but again, if you get it at the age of 25, you're just 65 when it wraps up. So it's still within the realm of your working life,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah,
have to
that
get
makes
it early
sense.
though.
That
Yeah,
that
but
makes
yeah,
more sense, I suppose. Yeah.
yes. Okay, so what's your favorite board game, movie, and video game?
Ooh. Board game. Got to say either Monopoly or Risk. Movie. I'm going to be a bit cliche and say Shawshank Redemption. I just love it. Maybe The Godfather. Again, that's equally cliche, but I do just love both those movies. And video game, Age of Empires 2.
Ooh, I have. It's been a while since I played Age of Empires. I mean, they had a new one, didn't they? Age of Empires 4, is it?
They did, and I'll tell you what, it's not bad at all, but it's I think Age of Empires 2 is the most perfectly balanced game, and like the fact that it's still got such a big following 25 years to 23, 24 years now since it first came out. I mean, it's still got tens of thousands of players regularly. It's just such a well balanced game. It's, I mean, obviously the graphics are now miles out of date, but Age of Empires 4, it was a nice update on Age of Empires 2. It kept a lot of the character, and it's got a big following in its own right. But for me, on the occasions when I will game, I will still to this day just go back to Age of Empires 2.
Yeah, I remember playing Age of Empires, 1 and 2, when I was a kid. But like I say, number 2 is one of those ones that just knocked it out the park, especially for, strategy games. And I remember having so much fun, just loading up a new map and, having it fresh and just playing that for 2 or 3 hours, getting resources, protecting, my little camp. And I mean, it's been a while since I thought about Age of Empires, but I think I'm gonna allocate a bit of time, hopefully in the over the next few months, and play some Age of Empires. I've got a Steam Deck. I'm gonna see how well it works on Steam Deck, and because that might be a way of being able to play without the. I don't know if you've played with a Steam Deck before, but
No, I haven't. No, I've just got my normal PC, which I use.
I mean, I'm loving these not portable consoles like the Switch, but portable systems like the PlayStation Portal and the Steam Deck, where you're playing a more traditionally, a traditional library. Because I'm able to, I can sit with my family and not be in a different room where I'm on my PC, or be on the PS5 and hog the TV. I can
Yeah,
sit there, literally just have the important mode and still have family time. And definitely some of these systems have been great for dads and adults.
yeah.
I feel like that's what they were made for, not kids.
Oh no, I can imagine. That's A lot of these kind of there's a big renaissance actually now, kind of for people looking at the older games, the kind of the ones from the 90s and the early noughties, and anything which increases access to that, I think is great, because to me that was when I was kind of late kid, early teen. That was kind of my era of gaming. I loved it. So the fact that a lot of these games are coming back, still have big followings. Half-Life 2 is one which still has a big following. I still play a
Oh
bit.
yes, I'm still waiting for
Um,
the next one.
I think we're all waiting for. Yeah, we've all
Like,
been waiting for a long time.
wait, was it 2000? Because 2004 is when Half-Life 2 came out, but Episode 2 was that '07 or '08?
Oh, it was around then. Yeah,
It's been 50. I was still in high school.
yeah.
And I remember thinking, it'll be by the time I get into college, episode 3 will probably come out. Then university went by, and then it's been 10 years since no, it'll be 10 years next year since I graduated. I've, gone through different, ups and downs in my career. I've got a house since then. I've got, the second kid on the way, got married. Like, there's so many things that have happened. I'm like, I'm still waiting for the next, obviously, excluding Alex, Half-Life Alex, which was great, but I feel like that was not the main, like it wasn't a main
Yeah,
Half-Life.
I haven't played that, but
It's
you
really
need
good
you need
actually.
VR for that, don't you? Is that right, or do you not
Yes, you
need
do. I
VR?
mean,
Yeah,
there are some mods where you can play with their VR, but it's in VR where it shines because it's a VR game.
yeah.
In all fairness, if you have a gaming PC and if you already have a VR headset or you're thinking about getting it, it is one of the best experiences that you can, enjoy outside of being a Half-Life fan. It's amazing. But
Okay.
again, I want a Half-Life game.
Yeah, same.
I mean, I feel like you probably have a lot of similar gaming tastes to me, especially the old classic games. You mentioned Half-Life 2, Age of Empires as well. Did you ever play a game called Black and White back in the day?
I did Black and White 2. Is that you got the
One and
different
two, yes,
gods and stuff? Yeah.
yes. Like be
Uh,
good, be evil, be a god.
yes, that yeah. I had Black and White 2. That I had definitely. They're kind of big animals, the gods. Is that right?
Yes, 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 yes.
Yes. Yeah.
I,
Yeah, that was a
I
good
remember
one.
playing that. I mean, that's no franchise I wish they, will bring back. When you play Age of Empires 2, out of curiosity, do you play the original or do you play like the HD remastered version?
I do the HD remaster. I don't do the kind of the new. I mean, it's quite heavily modded these days. You've got different extra civilizations that didn't exist in the old game and stuff like that. But I play the HD version of the original game though.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because I haven't played the HD version. I've only played the original. Like how much of an upgrade is the graphics for from number 2 to the HD version?
It's pretty decent, I would say. I haven't played the original graphics of AoE 2 for a long time, but when they did the remaster of the AoE 1, they brought it out so that it was very easy to swap between the HD version and the original version.
Mm.
So that's the 97 one, and that when you can easily swap between the two, massive difference. Like that's a big upgrade.
I mean, I'll definitely check it out, and maybe that one on the Steam Deck, and that's been another great thing about consoles like the Steam Deck is games that are like 10, 15, 20 years old that on your big 34 or like 49-inch monitor just don't look good anymore. They look fine on that small screen, and you can
Mm.
take it with you.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that's a big. I can imagine that being a big advantage.
Yeah, and it means, especially games from about 10 years ago, you can max them out. They still look decent today, like Max Payne 3, like the GTA 5, that sort of era, and you can run them really well, and they still look good because they're on a small screen.
Mm. Yeah, and I've got quite a big monitor on my desktop, and that's where I do most of the gaming when I do game. But I think for a lot of the older ones, it could work perfectly well on a
Oh, yeah.
15-inch, 13-inch screen.
So, what video game are you looking for? I know you said you don't really play many games outside of some classics, but are there any video games you're looking forward to, whether or not you think you'll get around to playing them?
So I do have to, because I do enjoy games. That's the thing. I can easily spend a lot of time doing it, so I try and prevent myself from doing it. I got quite big into City Skylines. I don't know if that's
Okay,
something
yeah.
you've ever come across. And they
Yes, I
did
have.
City Skylines 2, and I haven't tried it yet, but it got absolutely panned, which is a shame because the thing which made City Skylines 1 so good is the Sim City reboot in 2013 was awful.
It was. I
So
remember that.
yeah,
and then City Skylines was that. Now, am I right or wrong? Did City Skylines start off as a mod initially? The
It
team.
it was a weird kind of it was I think it's a Finnish studio, and they had a kind of like a very niche game which was a traffic simulator, which had kind of city building as
Mhm.
like a as like an add-on to the traffic simulator. And then SimCity came out, was awful, and so their publisher said, "Right, you guys developers, you've got this base game, turn it into a city sim rather than a traffic sim, and we'll release it as soon as possible." And in the space of about, I think it was about 15 months, they put together a fantastic game, very well balanced, good graphics, and the entire city sim community pretty much moved entirely away from
They
SimCity
did,
towards City
yes.
Skylines. And then they've essentially done everything that SimCity did wrong with the SimCity release for the City Skyline 2 release. I mean, we're talking broken sims, broken game dynamics, very, very pared back in terms of clearly what they're doing is they're trying to get a lot of the DLC out later. So they've pared it back quite a lot. And for a guy like me who dips in and out of games, doesn't play regularly, I'll play maybe once every other month or so. Um, I'm not going to spend £50 for a game I touch once a month unless it's really, really good. And then if it's really, really good, I'll do it and I'll support the developers, particularly a small indie studio like them. But only if it's a finished product, basically.
Yeah, and that's definitely a huge problem with the gaming industry today. Is so many products that are released that are unfinished, that have day one updates. Sometimes those updates can be like 20, 30, 50, like 100 gigabytes, and it's insane because not everyone got gigabit, Ethernet, internet, and yeah, like with all the DLC, purchases now with mobile, there's definitely a lot of bad side to the gaming industry that wasn't there 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago.
Mm. I think that EA is one which is kind of the way they implemented DLC. Everyone aped them, and I mean, it's just now that is their model for all their big titles, for FIFA, for Madden, for The Sims. It's all about, can you turn gamers into subscribers?
Yeah. And I
It's a
feel
real
like
shame.
most studios have gone to that. I feel like they've seen what EA did, and even though they had a lot of backlash, they still made a shit ton of money. And it
Yeah,
was like, okay, yeah, I might, be hated, but at least I'm hated on a big, nice, cushion of money. So it's like, whatever.
exactly. And I think, like kind of like you said earlier, like people are going to have to adapt or they're going to get left behind. I do feel sorry for the studios because that's how you make money on a game these days, and
Yes.
it's. I would love for it not to be. I think the open source gaming community is very good. I'm not big in it at all. Like I said, I'm not as much of a gamer as I was when I was a kid. But I know that there's a lot of good kind of games which are open source, small developers, small indie developers, and they do their best to fight it. And I've got a lot of respect for them.
Oh yeah, but I do hope that we do get non-mode player, more single player experiences, more finished products, and just less money, driven throughout the game. I'm happy to pay a bit more upfront, but again, there's so much competition that people don't want to buy it and spend that money unless it's so AAA. And at that point, you almost need to spend nine figures anyway, or eight figures definitely for a 3D AAA title. And you see why companies and studios do push a lot of in-app purchases and DLC that they normally wouldn't have, because otherwise it's just not financially feasible, or they just go to smaller mobile games. And we have, as a result, got a lot of smaller indie games, that are on a smaller budget, smaller scale, and instead of 50, 60 quid, they might charge you £10, for example, and it's a nice experience in itself. So even though the industry has kind of gone downhill from a certain perspective, it's actually brought to us a lot of games that probably wouldn't have occurred in the
Yeah,
old 15, 20-year ago model.
I think that's a good way of looking at it. Um, and also, like I say, I'm happy to pay as much as needed if it's a finished product with like the full content there for the full game experience and it doesn't have lots of bugs. What annoys me is if it's pared back and it has bugs and it's full price.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, final question, two-parter. Does money buy you happiness, and what does a good life mean to you?
Um. Yeah. So for the money buys happiness, I'd go back to kind of what I said earlier, which is I do think what those studies say is exactly right, that it helps massively up to a point, and that point is when you don't have to worry about the daily necessities, don't have to worry about debt, and you can live in a house and not worry about being kicked out of it. I think after that point, I can see situations where it will really help if you have a sick child and you can afford to make that sick child's life better. That would be a case of money genuinely buying happiness out of an otherwise very difficult situation. I think if you love travel and you can afford to fund a life of travel, that's great. But it's not the money there which is helping; it's the what you're doing with the money which affords you the happiness. I don't think money in its own right is a good thing to chase after. And I think a good life is a life where you're doing productive work, learning something every day, helping out the rest of society, and you wake up feeling like you're fulfilling that mission.
Okay. Love that, and yeah, I mean, I agree. With what you said about the money, the money side of things, and like with the travel, and obviously the key point to note there, money in itself isn't what you might want, but the money is the catalyst that might get things going and started. Yeah, because you might like traveling. And you might like going and staying at this place and experiencing this, experience in different countries. But without the money, you can't do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, I just want to thank you for coming on to FireDEV today. It was great talking about AI, about SurveyMind as well, and what you're doing. So yeah, I just want to say thank you for coming on today, Ran.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, it's been really, really exciting.
And I want to thank everyone else for listening to this episode of FireDev. I'll see you in next week's episode of FireDev. And also check out Rand's company, SurveyMind. And what's the website, Rand?
It's surveymind.io.
SurveyMind.io. So check that out. And hopefully we see some exciting things over the next few years, especially with the way AI is going. I'm sure it'll be different in 3 to 4 years compared to how it is today.
Hopefully.
Yeah. See you, everyone. Bye bye.